Welcome back to Switzer. Mining is going off the boil, yes, we all know that. But what industries will step up over the next few years to power the economy? Phil Ruthven is the founder of IBIS World and will shine the spotlight on the industries that will fly and fall in 2014. Phil, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Peter.
Now, it's always great to see you, because I remember fondly in 2009 when I was praying for a stock market recovery and an economic recovery, and you were one of the few out there supporting me, and you actually predicted that when the market does come back, you'd see 20% rises in a year, and we had a couple of those, so you were right on the money then.
Yeah, it pays to be an optimist, I think, really, throughout life, doesn't it?
Well, ones that are right as well. All right, Phil, let's talk about what you're seeing. What are the industries that are going to do well over 2014 and beyond?
Well, I think they're an interesting mixture, certainly starting with the year we're in, Peter. I think mining will still be number one, despite the fall in commodity prices. I think the falling dollar is going to help a huge amount. So I think mining will probably go close to being number one again, as it was last year. And I think the interesting one is that health, which has been running either first or second for some time now, is likely to come in as our second fastest growing industry. And when you see the extra charges that have now come on to our health insurance, I suppose it almost is a forewarning that it's going to be a big year in terms of revenue. So I'd put health in there. Yeah. Interestingly, I think agriculture will probably do well. It's a tough industry, but again, given the falling dollar, and I think commodity prices holding up, I think it's going to be one of our better performers as well. Professional and technical services are always up there. That includes everything from things like writing software, obviously accounting and finance services. And I think finance, despite the predictions that it'll be a quiet year, I think finance will do quite well, if only because of superannuation. But not only that, I think some other areas of finance will do quite well too. So there was enough up there, I think, to keep the economy moving quite well this year and next.
Okay, so when you look at these industries, you know, you look at it in terms of employment. What other key factors give you the insight that this industry is going to do well and those ones aren't going to do well?
I think, first of all, you have to look at the sort of track record of where each of those industries are coming from. And you probably know me well enough, Peter, to know that I like to look at about 50 or 100 years before I predict even one or two or three. Yeah. And not that predicting any single year is ever going to be easy. It's a bit like trying to predict exchange rates by the month, and you'd have to be a genius. But I think it's pretty clear that what's generally winning in Australia are, of course, the service industries. And over any 5 or 10 year period, they're now accounting for over 70% of the economy. And they're the ones that are growing because that's what the consumer wants. And interesting, not only here, but probably overseas as well, because whilst we think of our mining exports, it's not that long ago when manufacturing was our biggest exports, and before that was, of course, agriculture. But if we were to prepare to look out 10 or 15 years, of course, our services will probably be number one, starting with tourism for a start, and perhaps medical services too. So really, society is looking, once you've got enough goods in life, cars, refrigerators, furniture, homes, you really are starting to look at services, and they're the ones that are driving this economy, and pretty well the whole of the OECD, which is the developed world.
Phil, one of the interesting, you know, I've got the chart here that you've provided on industry growth, and you've got education growing at what, around 2.5% or something like that.
About 2, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so why won't the dollar help education in 2014? Is it a slow burn reaction from consumers?
Well, it sometimes does take a little while to overcome the negativities of perhaps the last couple of years when we've had a high dollar. And to some extent, we had some problems with India because of perceived racism too. But I think when we look at education as a whole industry, though, Peter, I think it's as well to remember that the combination of primary and secondary education plus TAFEs really are the dominant part of education. Now, universities are still pretty substantial. They will turn over perhaps over 26 billion this year, but out of an industry that will turn over about 74 billion, it's roughly about a third. And that's the area that we've been exporting, of course, is tertiary education. And I think that will start to do quite well anyway with the falling dollar as well. But But to some extent, we might be lucky to get the sort of growth that we did enjoy for perhaps the last 10 years. I think that sort of very high-speed growth will slow a bit because we are facing a lot of competition out there as well.
Okay, the property sector's been a bit frustrating for investors. What do you see happening there?
Well, I think it'll be a good year actually for the real estate industry at large, Peter. Whether it be somebody that's selling real estate, of course, and they've had a pretty lean couple of years as well, or those that are, if you like, rental investors. I think they're going to start to do well because I think the rising property prices will be accompanied by rising rental prices. So that I feel pretty bullish about the real estate area, particularly in housing. I'm not quite so sure about some of the commercial stuff though, Peter, because particularly if you're into retail commercial and high street retail commercial property and you drive down either Paddington or you drive down Bridge Road in Melbourne, what you're seeing is store after store being empty. And I think that there's certain areas of commercial property are going to struggle a bit really over the next year or two. But I think housing will probably do quite well. Okay, so I can't see what the retail... there's your retail number there. It's around, 2 point something percent. Yeah.
Is that partly the challenge of the online world?
Well, it's certainly that, Peter, because we've seen online retailing grab about 6% of all retail sales last year, but that's going to very quickly climb towards 10%, and I think within a decade you'll be seeing something up around 15 to 20% of retailing will have gone online. Now that's going to hollow out a great deal of what we see as the physical retailing stores. But I think the other area that's worth thinking about when you think about retailing being slow is that it is a fairly saturated market in terms of households. Now, population is growing at about 1.3%, so that's going to normally give you nearly that amount in growth, and the rest will be in discretionary buying. But it is a fairly saturated market, retail, whether it be for food or furniture or anything else. And again, it comes back to other services being more in demand these days. So retailing's got the double whammy, I suppose, of facing a near saturation of consumption, coupled with, of course, the inroads of technology. And what I find interesting, Peter, is that the impact of the internet is having virtually the same impact on retailing today as the introduction of self-service retailing did in the 1960s, when it wiped out corner grocer stores, changed the whole face of hardware stores. And we're seeing virtually the same equivalent revolution come through now with the internet. So it's here to stay, and it's certainly going to carve big chunks out of traditional retailing.
Phil, is it risky for us to assume when a store like JB Hi-Fi says it's opening up more stores that that's a misguided strategy, or will some businesses actually do well enough to open up more stores while others, like I'm noticing in America, Macy's and Sears, JCPenney, they're closing down stores?
I think that's absolutely true. I think when things get tough, the tough get going, as they say, and in the case of firms like JB Hi-Fi, it's easier for the good players to win market share in tough times than it is in good times. And that's what I think we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think we'll see quite enormous rationalisation across our retail sector over that period of time. Now, we're already used to the fact that just 3 retailers control all of the supermarkets, and 2 of them in particular, of course, being Woolworths and Coles. And then you look at many other sectors where the similar dominance is there. But right across the whole face of retailing, particularly in those that are very, very competitive, like electrical and electronic areas, yes, I think it's going to be a case of the best ones are going to win handsomely in market share, and others are just going to go to the wall, I think. OK, before we finish up, Phil, what's your view on the Aussie economy over 2014? I said earlier, Reserve Bank's got numbers like 2.5%. Can you be more optimistic or not? I think it'll be nearer to 2.8, and if we were dead lucky, it might even hit 3%. Now, that's still below what our long-term average is in Australia, which is around about 3.5% each year, Peter. But 2.8 is not to be whinged about, particularly when you look at Europe or America, those GFC-impacted countries. I think you'll be very grateful for 2.5 or 2.8, as I suspect it will be. The only thing I think we're going to be careful about, though, Peter, is that we're no longer part of the European or American economies. We're now part of the Asian economy. And that's where 75% of our exports go. It's where most of our inbound immigrants are coming from, where our inbound tourists are coming from. And there we've got to compare our sort of 2.8 or 3 to what is an average of nearly 7% growth every year in the Asian area. So I think we've got to be careful not to compare ourselves as we used to Europe and America as much as we have, because it is a new world, and we are going to have to compete in this area more than the European or American one.
Phil Ruthven, thanks for finding time for us.
You're very welcome, Peter.
That's Phil Ruthven, probably one of the most sought-after speakers on the business speaking circuit. You can see why. He has a really good crystal ball. If you want to read my thoughts each morning at the close of Wall Street, check out my website, switzer.com.au. And if you have a self-managed super fund, have a look at the switzersuperreport.com.au website. I'm Peter Switzer. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week.